Did you guys know that Airbnb publishes white papers about their algorithm? Essentially, you can back engineer and learn about how Airbnb's algorithm actually works. And by learning that, you can actually learn how that affects you as a host and things that you can do. Now, I didn't know this, but my head of data, Carson, here, he actually is a significantly bigger data nerd than I am, way better at this stuff than I am. And he loves Airbnb probably just as much as I do, but he goes even deeper into the actual algorithm of Airbnb and reading these white papers. So Carson on his weekend is reading these papers and then sending them over to me and being like, hey guys, check out what I learned. I'm like, other people need to know this as well. And so Carson and I are going to have a quick little conversation about the algorithm, about how it works, just so you have an understanding of what's happening, right, when guests are looking for your homes. But then also, what should you do about this? Because really, that's the end all be all. Why does it matter, right? So hopefully we don't get too technical on you, but if we do, it is what it is, and we'll just go back and forth. But Carson, how you doing, man?
Hey, thanks for having me, John.
All right, so explain to everybody what these white papers are. Like, help them understand what a white paper is in the first place, in case anyone doesn't know, because as you know, I barely know what they mean. And so let's go a little bit deeper into what these are, why they publish them, and then we'll start digging deeper into it.
Yeah. So it's similar to academia in how research teams will publish papers that get into publications. Um, Technical companies do the same thing, and they do it to attract top engineers around the world. They also present these papers at conferences. So the one that I shared with you most recently that was called Understanding Guest Preferences and Optimizing Two-Sided Marketplaces, Airbnb is an example, was engineers from one of their various search teams. And they actually presented this paper, among many others, at a data science conference in Spain this past year. Um, Airbnb
Could
is one
you
of the biggest believers in open source technology. And that's also why they're actually pretty open about sharing some of these papers.
could you actually just show people what that paper looks like? Because I'm sure there's a handful of people that are like just curious as to what the visuals would be for that, and then we can go deeper into it.
Yeah. So all these papers, they'll have the authors. They're written in, I can't remember what the technical structure is, but they're written in the same exact structure for technical papers. They go through all of the different algorithms and calculations that they're using on the back end to determine different pieces. So in this particular case, right, they're starting to go through modeling guest choices based off of price elasticity and price sensitivity factors. And they're starting to outline the equations they use to um, kind of start to calculate essentially how do booking behaviors change as a host increases or decreases their prices in 1% increments. And as they're doing that, they're starting to model this behavior over time to try and start to understand where the breakpoints are. That's the elasticity component for particular guests. These papers are very, very technical, very in depth. Even with as much data knowledge as I have, they are still extremely complex and detailed. So don't feel bad if this goes over your head because a lot of it can on my end too. And
It's
I
going
think
over
that
my
that's where
head
the
too.
fun starts to
So,
come in.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's where some of the
Okay.
fun starts to come in terms of starting to take some of that information and trying to distill it into, wow, that's awesome. That's really cool. But what does it mean for us? What does it mean for us as hosts? And that's what, we're going to kind of cover right now.
Okay. Let's first explain. First, I want you to explain what you've learned, right? And then from there, we'll talk about how we think this is going to matter for hosts specifically. And also, hosts, while you're listening to this, try to think of like how this will matter for you, what it will mean to your home, different things like that. So go ahead, Carson, with whatever you want to start with and be able to explain it from there. And I'll ask you questions as we go.
Yeah, I think, and you and I were just talking about this, the other day. One of the biggest misconceptions there is, or that I see in a lot of Facebook groups with hosts, is that there is an algorithm singular, right?
Mm,
There's the Airbnb algorithm, or we got to crack the code to this or that. And the
right.
reality is, there are a lot of algorithms that are running very, very quick. If you take a step back and consider the magnitude of what has to happen from the time a user searches, right, and they
Mm-hmm.
click submit, I mean, Airbnb loads within seconds. Unless you got crappy internet, Airbnb
Yep.
loads within seconds. But think of the sheer scale of data that they have to sift through, they have to parse, they have to aggregate, they have to organize. They're doing all these comparisons between the listings, and all of that happens in 5 seconds or less, sometimes very,
So
very
just to
fast.
show an example here, because I actually did want to pull this up to give like an example of what you're saying. How many Airbnbs show up on per page?
18.
Okay. So I just typed in Miami, Florida, right? I'm going to put no dates. I'm going to put no guess. Like I'm not going to say anything about that and just click search. Based off of me, these are the properties that show up, right? And again, there's 18. To be on the first page, and even you can see like where they're located on the right-hand side, they're kind of all up and down, actually all the way up past Fort Lauderdale when I typed in Miami. South Miami didn't even pop up when I did that. And the reason this is important, and this is actually the fact that it showed all the way up to Fort Lauderdale changes this. But in Miami, if you go onto AirDNA, there's 20,000 listings. If you were to actually grab Hollywood and Fort Lauderdale and all that stuff as well, that's going to throw in, let's see how many more listings pop up. Another 16,000. So 36,000 listings, and it's got to decide on the 18 that I should see. That's what you're referring to when you're saying, like, how does it determine which one shows up, right? Now, obviously, if I had it in
Absolutely.
like, I've got 16 guests, or I've got 4 guests, or I've got 2 guests, or South Beach, Miami in comparison to Miami in general, all those things would have changed it. But that's in a sense what you're saying the algorithm is doing in like a second or two, right?
Yes. All
Yeah.
of the algorithms.
All
Because
of the
consider it like
yeah,
an onion.
algorithms.
There's layers to it. And what you
Hmm.
actually just showcased there too, um, is the location retrieval algorithm. And that they published one of their first papers on that back in November. And that was kind of a big surprise to me. And it's, after you read some of these things, it's like, well, duh, yeah, of course, they're doing a geo filtering prior to taking any sort of um, filters or other factors that the guest might be filtering on. It's all
Right.
geographically inclined.
Which is
Um,
so that's what you learned back in November, which is the first time you started talking about the algorithm. And then obviously you brought it up again very recently. And I'm like, okay, we gotta start talking to other people about this. But you from that research paper, you realized that they have a location algorithm that is the very first one that goes off with certain reasonings and logics for what you're going to see, right? And like I just looked at Miami and I was seeing way past Fort Lauderdale for some reason, right? Which to me is actually like pretty fascinating that would go that far, but that is the first algorithm that comes up that you've explained, correct?
yeah,
Yeah.
correct. And some of that in determining like how they showcase what's on the map, because we have to remember that Airbnb has one what I'm going to call deterministic goal, right? Because when we're talking about any sort of algorithm, there's going to be contributing factors and deterministic factors. Deterministic factors are the conversion you want, in which this case it's a booking, or if it's not a booking, it's going to be a wish list or a save, right? It's some sort of definitive action that has it is either a booking or implies strong booking intent, because not everybody's at the point in their planning where they're ready to book. Those are deterministic factors, and that would be what Airbnb is trying to optimize for. They're trying to increase that for. You have contributing factors, and that could be click-through rates, impression rates, time on page, how far down did you scroll, how far into the photos did you get. All of those other kind of user interactions are contributing. They're not deterministic towards if you're going to necessarily book that place, but they do contribute to the bigger picture in terms of how valuable they found your listing.
So Um, if I understand correctly, there's sort of two pieces there that I want to kind of break down. So the first one is that Airbnb is trying to do what's best for Airbnb. That's one major
Yes.
component, right? You kind of worded this earlier when we were talking about it, which is that Airbnb is trying to increase their conversion and booking rate. So obviously, Airbnb as a company makes money when somebody books. And so they're going to try and do everything to put the right properties in front of you to ensure that you end up booking while you're on the site. And the interesting thing is that Airbnb's algorithm is working kind of like the For You page on TikTok or Reels. where it is trying to determine what I should see based off of my history and what you should see based off of your history to then get you in front of a property that is the most desirable based off of what you tend to look at, because that's going to increase your chances of actually booking that property. Is that right? Am I understanding that properly?
Yeah, definitely. So to kind of break that down, they actually talk about this in the papers too, because just like running any experiment, you start with a hypothesis, you run your experiment, and then you measure your outcomes, right? And in some of the cases in these papers, they actually talk about a lot of the failed tests and a lot of the failed trialings. But when they do talk about the successes, it's kind of funny sometimes in that like they're talking about lifts in booking rate or booking conversion rates in the magnitude of like 0.25 and zero point 0.5. Because when you're a platform as big as Airbnb and you are quite literally getting millions on millions of queries, every few days,
Right.
very, very small lifts in that realize into very big revenue downstream.
Hmm.
So they are looking for even the smallest of increments that they can reliably determine back to the test that they were running. And then it is accounting for non-canceled bookings. So a few people out there who are like, well, what if they go back and cancel? They do go back and look for non-canceled bookings, since people could be booking, the lead days could be 90, 120. So they do actually cover that in a number of the pieces as well, and explain how it's very specifically non-canceled bookings. And then they evaluate the results of any experiment over an extended period of time, because there's point in time bias. The experiment may have ended today, but there could still be 500,000 outstanding bookings that could potentially cancel. And if you were to look at the results of the experiment in 90 days, the result could actually look very different, because a certain population of that 500,000 ultimately ended up canceling. And then the second thing you talked about was the personalization component. And this is another piece that I think it kind of gets back into that like creepy marketing technology world where all these platforms have so much, data and information
I
on
don't know
us.
about you, man, but I love it. I love it. Like, why would I not want Airbnb to tailor the exact type of property that I'd probably be interested in? Or even like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone complains about, the data being creepy. I get it, but when I go to my like For You page or Instagram, I'm seeing stuff that actually is
Same.
enjoyable for me, right?
I
So I'm like, go for it. And so if Airbnb is doing the same thing, I'm like, go for it. That's my personal opinion. Obviously, it gets a little weird with the ads, but that's a whole other world.
I'm with you. I cookie me all day. Just show me relevant things or things that you think I'm gonna like. I'll take all those cookies.
Give me your
But with
propaganda
Airbnb,
over and over again.
but with
Yeah.
Airbnb, when it comes to personalization, usually like one of the first areas of pushback, one of the first areas that I always question is like, well, how do you personalize for a new user, right? Or how do you personalize for someone you don't have data on?
Hmm.
And they'll start to build data on you over time. And that's part of the reason why they believe in what they call diversity in listings. So for many of you hosts, sometimes when you go to the search results page and you look at the 18 listings that are relative to yours, and you're like, why the heck is Airbnb showing this property compared to mine? And it's because they're purposefully doing that. They're showing diversity of listings, and that diversity can be based off of location, it could be based off of price, it could be based off of reviews and the types of reviews and the combination of all of those things. And they're doing that on purpose to one, um, not show a completely uniform product, right? It honestly would be kind of boring if you went to the results page and every property was the same. The price points were all the same, they looked the same, they had the same amenities. It's actually not good from a product perspective or conversion perspective when you position your product like that. So what they'll do is they add that diversity in there because they want to see how you react. They're seeing if out of those 18 listings, if they have four that are luxury or higher priced, four that are what we could call discount properties and they're undercutting the market, and then you have your 10 that are right there in the middle. If you imagine a bell curve, they're right there in the middle within, 5 to 10% of one another. They're building data to understand which listings did you click on? How long did you spend on that listing? Did you even go to the high price listings? Did you go to the map and start moving around first? Do we maybe need to adjust the location for John? Like, we don't like that it was all the way in Fort Lauderdale. He went down to South Miami. And over time, they're not only collecting data on you and aggregating it, so that way in the future, when you make subsequent searches, they know, hey, you know what? John never clicks on these luxury listings. Like he's not going for the price. If we displayed prices to John that are 20% above what the market median or the market average is, never clicks on it. Over time, you want to guess what's going to happen? You're not going to see those listings.
Right.
Any property that's priced above your sensitivity level, you're just not going to show up for. And that's how they create what are called personas. And they have both guest personas and they have owner personas. I remember, I think I showed you the screenshot of the owner persona one time, and it's, like the casual host, the event host, the all-time host, the seasonal host, and something like that.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's how they
Yep.
generate those personas, and they
Hmm.
start customizing the experience. And then they create personas at the market level too, because not all markets are the same. You and I geek out on this all the time, in that,
All the time.
you have luxury markets, you have, what we call internally heads and beds markets.
Hmm.
Um, but then there's also markets where it's like you don't want to force the sleep count. In fact, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot if you're trying to force a bunch of heads in that market, and it's more of a luxury market. Like, you're not going to do as well.
Hmm.
Um, all those pieces come together, and that's how they create what they call the two-sided marketplace. How they are trying to bring the guest and the guest preferences to the host and the property details, and merge those together and try and serve up the best property to the right guest at the right time.
Okay. So obviously, our objective at STR Search is to be able to understand how to find the most optimal properties at the lowest possible purchase price to drive the most amount of revenue. And all I can think about when you're talking about these algorithms is what could we possibly do to create a home that not trick the algorithm, but like to be favored in the algorithm, or to like what would it be that would allow us to be more desirable, to be able to show up more, to be able to be like one of those number one recommendations out of the 36,000 that are available. Like that's what's running through my head right now as you're saying all of this. Um, and it's more about the evergreen stuff, not necessarily like little tricks that could fool the algorithm. Cause like you've got to build an Airbnb, right? You got to buy the home, furnish it, set it up. All
Mm-hmm.
that stuff can take like 6 months, and then the algorithm changed, and you did a bunch of things that were kind of hacky just to be able to make it work. And so, like my first initial thought on this, and if you could pull this up while you're doing this, there's quite a bit that we still need to go through, but just I want to get some thoughts out while we're talking about this. Could you pull up that circular map that showed the all of the homes in a circle and like the different colors and things like that? We have always known that location matters, right? And we've known that because when we study the data, we can see that certain homes in certain parts of the markets that we're in don't work as well. And so we are nervous about, helping people find properties that are outside of like the bubble, I guess you could say, right? Sorry, not this one, but the one that's actually a part of the research paper where it kind of looks like that. Yeah. So this is our data behind the scenes of how we figure out where to go in Miami, in case anyone was wondering. So I'm losing my train of thought. The location algorithm, which is the first location or the first algorithm that goes off, is determining which properties are showing up and exactly where they're located. I
I don't
feel
know if
like
I have
that
that one ready to go.
that's okay. I feel like that will be a bigger factor as we continue to refine like where to go and where not to go. Like within these specific markets. And do you, wow, sorry. I just did a bunch of rambling there because I had a whole bunch of thoughts going back and forth. So I
You're
apologize
good.
for everyone listening to this being like John's headed nowhere. But like Carson, do you think there's a way that we could figure out if we were going to help a client find a property within a specific market and we knew what their demographic should be, if we could determine like, hey, we probably shouldn't go in this part of the city because it's literally not showing up to like page 5. Is that something that we could figure out?
Yeah, I think it's something we could start to directionally back into. And part of the reason I say that is because anytime we're looking at the map in particular and at rankings as well, there's a lot of bias that implicitly comes with it. And one of them is point in time bias, right? So, if you searched for May 30th right now, not only is the results subjective based off of you,
Yeah.
it's also subjective based off the availability as of those dates. So then if you go search in another 4 days, a number of those properties could have been booked. They've changed their prices and now they're either bumped up or bumped down. So there's point in time bias. So when it comes to like geographically, and if we can back into um, in perpetuity, if that's always going to be a good place to buy, directionally, I would say yes, and we could start to back into that. Um, but it is fluctuating constantly because of inventory shifts in the market. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we did look at, or I did look at recently, I think where you can start to get into trouble, and this is actually might be an example of where you're starting to get at. I can't remember the exact market. It was somewhere in California. I think what's the big national park out in
Yosemite.
California?
Yosemite.
Yosemite. That's what
Yeah.
it was. I was underwriting a property in Yosemite, and it was about 10 miles outside of the main geographic center for this city.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the issue that I talked through with this particular person was there's so much inventory in that particular city that when I use VPN to proxy different queries for clients, because like that's a big thing, right? If I go to Airbnb right now and I search, I'm going to see the results based off of me. And I really need to do this 20 or 30 times. So like that's how much effort that, when we work with our clients, like we're
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
literally going and doing this.
Yeah.
So I'll probably do like 20 or 30 different queries. I'm picking different dates. I'm changing if I'm using kids on the search, if I'm using adults, if I'm bringing a pet, if I'm not bringing a pet. I'm doing it in off season. I'm doing it in on season. And
Hmm.
what I'm trying to start constructing is how frequently for the subject property is there even comps in that general location being surfaced? And in this particular case, I can't remember how many I did, but it was one time. And even then it was a bit of a stretch. Like I was like, it's that the
Jeez.
property's kind of far away. And
Right.
part of the reason was because the map kept skewing towards more of the like core city center, and it's because regardless of the date, regardless of the filters, there's so much inventory to be surfaced in that market. Why would Airbnb go 10 miles outside of that city or 8 miles out of that city in the opposite direction of where the park entrance was, mind you? So it's like, you flag that, in which case that's a big example because this wasn't a cheap property. I think it was $700,000, maybe $650,000. And it's not to say, and I want to clarify, that you will never show up and that your property's doomed to fail, but you have a very big uphill battle to fight. You have to overcome a very large geographic, component to this, in which case you are also capping your upper bounds of your revenue.
Yep.
You talk about all the time the low, the mid, and the high. Well, your
Yep.
high just got a lot lower
Right.
if you are geographically picking the wrong spot.
And so, okay, a couple things on this. First off, I want to point out that this is not a property that STR Search was finding for one of our clients because we don't
Correct.
search in that area. It was something different. A client brought us a property asking for a review. And Carson, not knowing the market, needed to understand it better. And so, obviously, you were doing those queries to figure out where to go, where not to go. Um, that's the first piece. I just want to make sure that's clear. The second piece is that, yeah, you're fighting an uphill battle. You're even like what I'm thinking about are like, what about the market? What about the properties that are kind of in the middle of nowhere, right? That are like really, really well put together, but they're in the middle of nowhere. My thought is that if they're truly in the middle of nowhere, they don't have a really desirable destination 10 miles away that's a better option for the vast majority of people traveling. And again, Airbnb only is trying to increase their booking conversion. And so the odds of someone booking in that travel destination compared to 10 minutes away is significantly lower, right? You'd have to have the build it and they will come type scenario. But if you're almost seems like if you're going to do the build it and they will come scenario, you don't want to be too close to a very popular tourist destination because it actually is the algorithm's going to constantly pull towards that rather than towards you. Would that be accurate,
Yeah,
you
and
think?
I think the type of traveler also makes a difference here. So, staying in line with the example of that California market,
Yeah.
it's a pass through city on the way to Yosemite. And that's where I
Right.
think it makes a difference, right? Because that the city that we're talking about right now, it's not the destination, it's a pass through. People are staying there on their way to Yosemite, or people are,
Which,
it, they're that's their base site, and then they're driving to Yosemite, which is
yeah,
only 30 minutes away. Um, Whereas
Which
something
it
like you're describing, the
yeah,
remoteness, that is kind of the destination. Like that's the point of the trip. So I think that that kind of like market dynamic and traveler demographic, like that also starts to come into the fold where it's like, well, who's coming this way and what are they going for? Like where are they going? Because if you realize you're in a pass-through market and you're really just kind of like a base camp for people to leave and go to another destination, again, that's where I think the geography is massively important. Whereas something like what you're describing, it changes the positioning to where it's like maybe you're outside of Atlanta by like 2 hours or whatever it is, and it's a big
yeah,
city, but you're not near anything. You're trying to get like the bachelor trips, the bachelorette trips, the big group trips to come out there to what would be classified, and this is a technical term, as a dope property. And to stay to stay there, it's a little bit different, right? Because
yeah,
you are the destination.
yeah. So, okay. This is probably going to be an ongoing series, I think. If anyone's listening to this right now and you're thinking like this is intriguing, want to go deeper, want to learn more about it, and want us to keep talking about it or whatever it may be, like please comment down below. Because if so, we'll keep doing this. If not, if we don't see a lot of comments, we're just going to stop doing it. So, plain and simple. And we'll keep it all internal. We won't talk about it. But I wanna kind of hit on a point that you mentioned earlier when we were talking about this off camera. And you said even with these factors, pricing still has like the biggest motivating factor. Was that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. From
So
everything I have read across all
yeah,
of these different papers,
yeah.
once you get past your
Location.
eliminating filters, and what I mean
Okay.
by that is like if you search for 12 guests and you're only sleeping 10, you're never going to show up because you do not definitively meet the search criteria. Once you get past that point, price has been, is, and will continue to be one of the largest ranking factors in terms of where you're going to position on the page.
Why? Can you go deeper into it? Like I generally understand it. I mean, it's pretty logically makes sense, right? But is there any way that we could break it down to better understand the pricing portion of it, or should that be something that you dive a little bit deeper into and we have another conversation on?
I think that that would be something that we can, on a future call, if people like to see this and want to hear more, um, we can have a specific conversation dedicated to that. We'll actually pull up the papers, we'll look at some of the equations, talk about it, step through it, and then translate that into what it might mean for us as hosts. But that is definitely a very, very deep conversation.
Okay. Pricing is obviously the biggest deal. Location is the first algorithm comes through. Where you're actually located matters. You can figure that out by using an IP address to be able to essentially like go in incognito mode to be able to try and not have the algorithm like know you and try to see if the property you're considering to purchase is even popping up in the algorithm. And then other determining factors specifically about each individual. So like what I care about, what you care about on a regular basis is what Airbnb is going to feed us. And then even when we first get started, the algorithm is going to be giving us tests, right? Or when somebody first hops onto Airbnb, Airbnb is giving a bunch of tests to determine which types of properties that we care about more often than not. And to reverse engineer this, trying to figure out like how do we, you know, cater to this. We want to make sure we're definitely in locations that where Airbnb is showing up or going to show up to property. That's an easy one. But the second one is like, well, how do we get people to favor our listing so that it's almost evergreen and it's popping up for everyone? Do you know what I mean? And I feel like my initial thoughts on this is that if you obviously have a very desirable looking property, more people are going to click into it. And if more people click into it, just out of curiosity, whether they're going to book it or not, that's going to continue to boost you in the rankings to show up more and more, which may seem stupid obvious, but is that really just the gist of all of this? Or am I missing something?
So I'd say when it comes to like the click through rates in particular, I would define that as a contributing factor because you'd rather be clicked than not clicked.
Right.
But if all you do is ever get clicked and then you don't end up getting booked, there comes a point of diminishing return for Airbnb where it's you are just a window shopper, right? You are the
Right.
listing that looks good that no one ever pulls the trigger on, in which case, like it starts to become a negative for your listing.
Right.
And I think that one of the technical papers that they posted that we'll step through eventually, if people want to hear, it very specifically talks about, I think that they called it a bitwise model. I can't remember the exact name, to where they have their guess on which listing is going to get booked. So when you made your search for Miami earlier and we saw those first 18, they have essentially what they called like the antecedent listing or something like that, where they're guessing that that listing is going to get booked. And they have probabilities tied to that based off of the performance of that listing, the performance of that listing relative to the other listings, right? Because they know, like John's listing, when it gets paired against, Kyle's listing, John's tends to win, right? So if they know in the search results that John's going up against Kyle's listing and he's won 8 out of the last 10 times, they know that John's most likely going to win. So I'm saying that to isolate, they know who they think is going to win.
Right.
And if you continue to not win, or if you
Mhm.
continue to not get booked, that is reinforcing their algorithms as almost kind of like a negative, where it's like, oop, John lost again. We lost again. We lost again. And I think that that's why it's very important in your first 30 days, 60 days, because everyone talks about the algorithm boost you get at the beginning. That's
Yeah.
real. It's a very
Yeah.
real thing. You want to know why it's a real thing? They don't have data on you yet. They have to float your listing up. They are forced to essentially float your listing up and start putting you on the first page in the first 30 to 60 days, because that's your trial run. They got to see how you do. And if you do not do good in your first 30 to 60 days, again, I'm not saying that you can't do well and you can't come back from it, but yet again, you're going to be fighting a very big uphill battle, or you're just going to permanently be the listing that you'll get booked, but it's only after the other 100 listings that are getting placed above you get booked first.
Right. I think anybody who's actually listening to this right now is probably not one of those people, right? And they're probably like,
Yeah.
right, like, you know what I mean? That those types of listings are not priced properly and like way down, like not designed in a way that even is desirable and like can't close in a sense. When somebody looks at it, they don't pull the trigger on it. But here's, so I just want to take this a little further because like the idea of the property has to get booked. You don't want to get clicked on but not booked, right? And like ways to think about this. So I had a couple ideas. I'm going to try and run through them all. The first one that I want to kind of point out here is yesterday I was looking at a whole bunch of Airbnbs that Airbnb put in front of me, right? So if you go to airbnb.com, a whole bunch kind of pop up. They just, from all of your last searches, they think maybe this is what you'll want, right? And I looked at one because it was this absolutely beautiful barn, like a full wood barn with a pond in front of it and the full reflection of the pond or of the barn in the pond, right? So it's like this perfect reflection, and it was at sunset. And I was like, that's beautiful. And I clicked into it, and then the next four photos were the ceiling, the roof of the barn, and it was almost nothing else. I was like, this is one of the biggest like catfish listings I've ever seen, where I was like, oh my God, it's amazing. Holy shit, this is terrible. Right. So I bet you that listing barely ever gets shown, or sorry, that I bet you it has a really bad booking rate, but a really high click through rate for that reason. So the logical thing here as a host is make sure that your first 5 photos are great and then the photos afterwards. We talk about that a lot internally and help our clients know how to like psychologically put together your listing, or sorry, put together your listing in a way that psychologically makes people fall in love with it, and understand why your listing is better than other people's listings so that you get booked over them, increasing your booking conversion rate. But another thing I want to mention here is if we're talking about Airbnb putting you up against somebody because they know that if you're likely to look at property A, you're going to look at property B, it's not that hard to figure out which ones you're probably being put up against. So if you go into your market, especially if you're not in like Miami, but even if you are in Miami, you can still figure this out. You could generally understand which two properties are going to go side by side, because if say you have a 3-bedroom that sleeps 6 people and you have a pool and like not much else, and maybe you're priced for like $200 a night, go and find all the other ones that are relatively similar to that and then try to see exactly what they're priced at. Because if you know who you're the most comparable with in your market, right? Like who's your direct competition, and then you use softwares like RankBreeze or Price Labs to be able to figure out exactly what they're priced at, And then, like you were saying, Carson, that the pricing will always be the biggest factor. So then if you just automatically see, okay, I'm going to be up against these 5 to 10 different listings, they're all priced at X, Y, and Z. I'm going to slightly discount myself over them so that I capture the booking. Not only is Airbnb going to start to favor you because you have a higher booking conversion rate, but you're also going to get those bookings on an ongoing basis. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is like, hey, the algorithm is going to put you up against your competition, and pricing is one of the biggest factors. And so then, therefore, you should figure out who your competition is that Airbnb is putting you up against, and you should price better than them so that you're not losing out to that and then falling deeper in the rankings. Am I getting that
Did you
right?
know? Did you
Yeah.
know that Airbnb will actually show you in Airbnb um, the listings that they're comparing you against and who is
How?
booked and who is not booked for certain dates?
No. How'd you do
It's a very hidden feature that I don't see too many people ever talk about. But
that?
I was just talking to Brett about this. He's on the sales team because
Yeah.
both Brett and I self-manage. I don't use Price Labs. I do my own revenue management, but that's obviously because I'm a huge dork and I love this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But part of it is because like I track my own comps for the Des Moines market. That's where a lot of my listings are. And I also know which of those comps Airbnb in platform has as a comp for me too. I pay attention to their pricing. I pay attention to when they're booked and I'm not booked. And I pay attention to when they get booked, how much they get booked for. So I'm going to kind of botch this, but I'm pretty sure when you go
Why
into
don't we
Airbnb,
why don't we save this for another video? I feel like that is super
okay,
intriguing. And we can so that is a super intriguing one. If you guys want to see this, comment it down below about seeing that specifically and we can get into it. We've talked about pricing, we've talked about the way that Airbnb is actually comparing you to be and how to be able to see that. And then we've also just talked about going deeper into the algorithm to better understand it as well. So that's 3 different video ideas that I could do with Carson as well. So if you want to see Carson back on the channel again, please comment down below because I know, Carson, I know you're just about to go into it and then people are probably like, screw you, do it now. But I want to actually see this before you do it. And I kind of want to break it down and see how we can display it and make sense of it in an effective way rather than 37 minutes into this video. Does that make sense? Okay. Sorry, guys, but that is too intriguing. Okay. I feel like I just stopped our momentum that we had going there.
no. Well, and I think that's Airbnb. You know what always drives me crazy, and I still can't figure it out? You know, with all these technical papers, and Airbnb truly does have, one of the best engineering teams in the world. They're known for it. They create open source technology that like people use frequently in other organizations. Like that's how big of innovators that they are. So you know what always kills me? Why is the Airbnb smart pricing so bad? Or like why do people think it's so bad? Like
That is
they
such a
know,
good question. That is such a good question. It is brutal.
yeah.
It
You know what it is though? Part of me thinks that because when I first started Airbnb like 4 years ago at this point, 3 or 4 years ago at this point, and I was doing my research, even back then, that was one of the first things that I heard. Like Googling, watching videos, like that's one of the first things that you hear. It's something that everyone universally agrees on for the most part. I've never really heard anybody come to the defense of Airbnb smart pricing. It's always go third party pricing, use,
right.
Price Labs, Wheelhouse, all those other tools. Could it be that no one has tried it lately? Or could it be that no one who knows what they're doing to set the right parameters has tried it lately? So here's an idea, and I'd be willing to take this hit for people. I've considered on one of my listings for this year, even though we're already pretty booked up for a lot of the like late summer, turning smart pricing on and seeing if I could get smart pricing to work better as an A/B test against some of my other listings.
Right. Well, because you would assume that it would know better because it knows the pricings better. It knows who you're compared to better. Whereas Price Labs wouldn't be like, oh, this is who Airbnb is comparing you to. And then, interesting. You got to test that?
I got a pretty good setup for it too because it's hard to A/B test things on Airbnb
Yeah.
because it's multivariate. There's so
Yeah.
many factors that go in, but a lot of my units are duplexes.
Right.
So I have literally the same exact style, the same exact room count, the same exact bed count, sleep count, geographically same exact location, relatively comparable reviews. So like it honestly is a pretty good candidate for an A/B test to help normalize some factors. Yeah, I've honestly really been thinking about doing it because I had the thought yesterday or the other day when I was thinking about Airbnb smart pricing after reading this paper, and I was like, how can it be so bad? Why do people hate it so much? And I think it could be that no one has tried it or no one has tried it like with a good effort in so long because we're all so discouraged to do it.
That's a very good point. I'm just realizing now, you have a ton of properties that we could A/B test. I'm like, how much are you willing
Yeah.
to lose on those properties for tests?
You want to subsidize my
Yeah.
lost winnings?
We'll talk about that one. Anyways, this has been fascinating. We actually went much longer than I wanted to. I'm glad we went deeper. I know we like subtly talked about it, but I literally said we need to stop talking about it and start recording so we can go deep into this conversation together in front of everybody, so that you guys can get this information too. So, again, I can't say this enough. Comment down below if you want to see any of this, and we'll keep this series going and go deeper and deeper and try to make sense of this stuff. I think we also need to have a conversation about companies like RankBreeze and like how reliable their algorithms are. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying that I think we should have a conversation about it. And I think that's it. I think that's pretty well everything. And so hope you guys have enjoyed this. And Carson, we'll have you back if people want you back.
Nice. Thanks, John.
Oh, by the way, guys, this is the freaking brain power we have over at STR Search. So keep that in mind. If you're ever looking for a property, all we care about is this stuff, and that's what we're looking for. Is perfect track record so far. We don't plan on losing that track record. We help people identify profitable short-term rentals. Keep that in mind. See you in the next one, guys.